Marianne? Marianne Chevalier, est-ce que je peux vous... whatever. Veuillez venir ici, s'il vous plaît. Pardon. So we will still wait for a second because we need to get the internet connection to the chat. And apart from that, well, first of all, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your meal. And we will do another switch of two presentations. Next is Pascal Lombardo with personal online dosimetry with flexible phantoms. And as soon as I get the go, yeah, okay, take your time, don't worry. You're already online and see the chat, okay. Great, so then we can start. So Pascale, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Hello to everyone. Thank you, Hans, for the introduction. And yes, the title of our presentation is Personal Online Dosimetry Using Flexible Computational Phantoms, which is a long title, very generic one, if it was not for the two keywords, online and flexible. And well, to make you understand what we mean with that, I will try to rephrase the title. What we are trying to do at SCK with our computational dosimetry line of research is to develop a system for performing nearly real-time dose assessment in individual monitoring, where we make use of a pure computational approach. So fundamentally, what we want to do is to get rid of dosimeters. And of course, the question is, why do we want to get rid of dosimeters? Why do we want to do this paradigm shift of the most, let's say, well-known object in dosimetry? And well, the answer is in the fact that if you really think about it, dosimeters have not really changed in the last 70 years. So since when they were first introduced. Of course, the sensitivity, angular, and energy response, they all have improved. However, the fundamental limitations of dosimeters have become are the same of 70 years ago. So dosimeters can only provide single point measurements, which of course, as you know, is not really representative for a real life exposure scenario. Secondly, people don't particularly enjoy wearing dosimeters, so they don't pay attention to them. They often forget to wear dosimeters, or if they wear them, they wear improperly. And they also typically do not report about forgetting a dosimeter. Furthermore, dosimeters are mostly passive devices, so there can be a huge time delay between the moment of exposure and the actual readout of the doses, which of course has a negative impact on the effectiveness of radiation protection in trying to reduce the exposure. And finally, even though they improved, there is still a high uncertainty. The dosimeters are characterized by a high uncertainty, which is proven by the fact that often when we have people with multiple dosimeters, the dose between these two dosimeters is not correlated. On the other hand, besides misusing dosimeters, we also see that there is still quite some frequent misunderstanding and misuse of the concepts behind dosimetry, so the dose quantities. People do not really get the fact that the operational dose equivalents cannot be used for providing individualized dose assessment, for example, for estimating risk of incurring into health detriments. And this because, of course, the dose equivalents are sex-averaged, and they also assume a uniform exposure, which, of course, is not representative of inhomogeneous radiation fields that you normally find in real life. And finally, we can also see that there is a struggle both in the dosimetry and in the radiation protection communities, where scientists are trying to make the dose quantities, both the operational and the protection quantities, more useful and also more close to the reality of real-life exposures. And we see this by the fact that they are often changing the definitions. And well, somehow we want to try to get rid of all this by tackling the problem from a computational perspective only. And this, we think, it's becoming possible nowadays because in recent years there has been a huge development, mostly in the computational science world, So, for example, we see that nowadays there are several flexible computational human phantoms that can be used for individualizing those assessments. We have faster and more capable Monte Carlo particle transport codes, which allows us to, for example, make use of these flexible phantoms. And then we also have, from a completely different world called computer vision, we now have so-called depth sensing cameras, one of example of which you can see on the desk here in front of me. And if you couple these depth sensing cameras with a machine learning algorithm, you can fundamentally develop a system to track a worker in a workplace with very high accuracy. Well, fundamentally our idea is to put everything together by developing a system that allows us to perform nearly real-time those calculations. And the first, let's say, ingredient for us is the flexible computational human phantoms. And well, at SCKCN, we developed what we call the RAF phantom family, the realistic anthropomorphic flexible phantom family, where we have a set of 3 phantoms, an adult male, an adult female, and a 1-year-old female child. And these phantoms have been sculpted to be about fitting the reference masses from ICRP publication 89 and 145. However, we also used a slightly different approach compared to, for example, the ICRP mesh phantoms. We did not make use of tetrahedral mesh, but we used polygonal meshes, which is more of a format used typically in the video game and movie industries. These polygonal meshes are characterized for being surface objects only. So fundamentally, they are made of triangles and quads that are put together in forming the mesh. And it's only, what you define is only the outlining surface. There is no volume associated with this object. And also maybe interesting for the purpose of this presentation is that besides ICRP reference phantoms, we did not use actually segmentation of medical images as starting base for our phantom. We used anatomical atlases. And here you have a list of the one that we made use of. It's actually the most interesting one, especially nowadays, is the biodigital human by this biodigital company, which is easily accessible online if you want to make use of it. And okay, here I try to give an idea of more or less how we build the phantom, showing one of the most difficult organs, which is the skin. So fundamentally, we create a canvas with a projection, an orthogonal projection of the skin of the phantom that is rescaled to fit ICRP masses, ICRP global dimensions, sorry. And then we start from a simple object, in this case a rectangular parallelepiped, which we extrude, for example, in this direction down towards the leg, and we reshape, once we extrude the vertices, so that we can fit both in the lateral and in the frontal view to this canvas. And then, okay, we proceed towards the fit. As you can see, the first, let's say, work that you do is very approximated, and then slowly you refine also by increasing the number of vertices in your mesh. And then, okay, the same we do going up towards the torso, and then the head and the arm. As you can see, it's an incremental approach for which we develop the first a very rough approximated shape, and then slowly you increase the number of vertices, which gives you more freedom of modeling. And then, okay, here the hand. And then, okay, here the several next stages, where you have increasing level of complexity and accuracy in the modeling. One interesting thing maybe to notice here is that the skin, for example, is modeled only in the half. The rest of the phantom comes for free by doing a mirroring of this mesh. So we employ half of the time. And okay, if you want, I can show you other examples later on of how we sculpted other organs, but this is basically the basic approach. Start from a simple shape and try to get as close as possible to what you want to model. Now, besides modeling the shape of the organs, something important that we have to do with this polygonal mesh is to pay attention to the topology of the mesh. So if you see on the left side here, we have the original sculpted skin mesh of the child phantom in this case. But what we need to do then is to transform this mesh into something that is more ordered. And typically this is done by converting what are triangles, typically in the left side, into quads, which allows us to have a more regular structure of the mesh, and actually allows us to define how fine is this grid of the mesh, depending on what we want the phantom to do. So for example, if you see around the elbow of the phantom, the density of this mesh increases because we want to have more vertices to be able to deform this region with more ease. Now here there are some details about this procedure. Something that is also very important that we need to pay attention to is to be sure that this object is watertight, so that there are no holes, which is not always obvious in this polygonal mesh format. And then another important aspect for us is not to increase much the number of polygons. And this because besides developing anatomy, we also want to make our phantom flexible. To make our phantom flexible, we use an approach which is quite well known in the computational video gaming industry mostly, also in animation, and it's called rigging and skinning. These two procedures, rigging and skinning, they are quite laborious works that basically require you to define the area of influence for each bone into the mesh. So for example, here I'm showing in the child phantom the area of influence of the clavicle left bone on the surface of the mesh of the skin. And the color mapping, the color indicates, is a mapping that indicates how high is this influence or not. And then you need to fundamentally assign these weights for all the bones and for all the vertices, which for the, let's say, middle of the bone is relatively easy, but around the joints is actually a relatively complex operation that requires quite some skills, trial and error fundamentally. Okay, this up to the hand and then even to the fingers. Here I'm showing the 3 segments of the middle finger. And fundamentally, we need to perform all this because we want our phantom to be flexible. And now I will not go into much into detail. If you're interested, you can always contact us. But fundamentally, we have in our phantoms we have between 50 to 110, let's say, this virtual bone that allows us to control the posture of the phantom very easily. In principle, even to rescale the size of the phantom along the other dimension, but that's something that is still did not really explore fully. Now, to resume about this polygonal mesh modeling approach that we use, we believe it's actually a quite nice approach because it allows us to model complex objects in a relatively easy manner, as long as you learn how to use the software. It also allows us to perform what is called procedural modeling, which fundamentally allows us to develop geometry by means of a script. So, for example, bronchi, which are very ramified structures, and you don't want to stay to model that by yourself. You just write a program to create this ramification. At the same time, the tools from this industry, the graphic modeling tools, they are evolving very fast. So every new year there is a new update that allows us to model new organs more easily or to refine the mesh to improve the phantom anatomy. And then on top of this, it also allows us to kind of recycle the organs because we can, for example, reuse the organs that were developed for the adult male phantom into the female, after, of course, some adapting, and then into the child. So it speeds up also the development of other phantom. And all this besides the fact that we can, of course, animate easily the phantom to make them move. Now, on the bad side of this polygonal modeling approach, there is the fact that, as I was specifying before, polygonal meshes are only surface objects, so there is no volume associated to the organs. So in principle, organs, tissues, they can overlap without problem in this polygonal mesh format. It's up to us to have a control on that. And to do so, typically you need a conversion afterwards that converts this surface object into volume objects. So for example, voxelization or conversion to tetrahedral mesh. Also, another, let's say, negative aspect of this format is that to make use of the phantom and also of its flexibility, you need actually to use the tools that we use for developing the phantoms. So this, in particular, we use 3ds Max, which, as you may know, it's a quite expensive tool that requires a license, and also the learning how to use it properly, it can take quite some time. It's also quite frustrating, let me add. For this reason, we try to solve this problem, the first problem of, let's say, transforming the polygonal mesh into a volume object by using a voxelization approach. in fact, we tested the possibility of using a directly polygonal mesh in Gent 4 by using the G4 tessellated solid, DAG solid mesh from VecGeom. But none of them, to be honest, we are not sure that they work in the way that we want them to work. We're not sure that the particles are tracked correctly once they enter a surface, fundamentally. And also, besides Gent 4, other codes do not really support this polygonal mesh format. For example, FITS supports only tetrahedral mesh format. So for these reasons, and also for the fact that we cannot even really convert to this tetrahedral mesh format in a very, let's say, smooth way, we decided to just go for voxelization. So we, together with the rough phantom, we implemented a voxelization algorithm, which, okay, there are some specifications if you're interested into digging into this. But fundamentally, this voxelization algorithm is taken from a developer from NVIDIA. And it's nice because this algorithm can be easily parallelized on GPU. So this means that we can perform voxelization in a relatively short time, which is a huge advantage for what we want to do compared to, for example, to conversion to tetrahedral meshes. And now, besides developing the phantoms, I mean, we still had the issues of how to share the phantom without without having to buy a license of this 3ds Max software. For this reason, we actually develop a software tool, an interactive software tool, which we call IPP, Interactive Posture Program, where you, through a graphic interface, you can simply make use of the phantom and of its postural flexibility, and then convert it to the Monte Carlo code of that you are using. At the moment, we support MCMP, Gate, and Gent, and soon also FITS. So as output, you get directly the input file for voxelized input file for one of these codes. And also maybe interesting, I will show later some slides. We can also include directly within the interface of this tool a predefined geometry, for example, for an interventional cardiology room, as I will show you. And we can control parameters of the geometry so that the simulation will be generated already with these parameters included. And okay, here is the view of the interface. And if you notice along the hands, the feet, and the head, there are some dots and squares. These are called end effectors, and they're similar to what you have in robotics for controlling where a robotic arm, for example, is aiming at. So if you click on this object and you push them, the phantom posture will change accordingly. So it will try to reach that place, and you can do this for all the controllers, and including for the head. So the phantom can assume very different postures. And for example, this is also an interesting case that we are now studying. So this is for simulating caregiver doses in nuclear medicine. So in this case, we simulate the situation where a child is undergoing a diagnostic treatment, so is injected with with iodine, for example, or the parent is injected and is taking care of the child for a certain amount of time. So we want to assess what is the dose in such scenarios. And this is possible easily by using this type of tool. Now, also interesting is that we can include already the geometry of some exposure scenarios. In this case, interventional radiology, so we can include, for example, the patient body. We can include the C-arm. And not only we can include these predefined objects, we can also change the positioning of them. So we can change the body positioning of the patient, rotate the C-arm along the primary and secondary axis to, let's say, emulate the real exposure scenarios. And more interestingly, we can do this not only through the graphical interface, but we can do it directly by loading, for example, a dose structure report file, so that we can generate, let's say, case-by-case specific input file for each irradiation event. Now, besides generating input file, we can also visualize the output file in a, let's say, easy, intelligible way. So in this case, I'm visualizing the output file from an MCMP simulation with this of this configuration. where the doctor, where the main physician was wearing an apron. So as you can see in red, the gray part of the dose was delivered, of course, to the protective garments. If we take them out, then we can also visualize the dose, to the various organs more easily. Which, of course, let's say it's more of a game, but could be useful, for example, to prove to physicians the effect of radiation. More important for us is the quantitative dose assessment. So, of course, we can read out the dose on a voxel level and then compute doses on organ or sub-organ level. Also interesting, maybe for visualization purpose, is that we can visualize the tracks of the particles by reading out the particle tracks or the phase space files, and visualize the type of interactions that have been ongoing in this simulation. So, for example, in here you can see, so in red below there is the generation, the source. In yellow there is a scattering, which happened on the patient, and in black there is the depth of the particle in the simulation, which happened on the detector mostly. But now, besides the phantom side, what we are trying to do is to implement a system that does this information in an automated way. And for doing this, we make use of 3D cameras and machine learning, in particular skeleton and object tracking algorithms. Now, there are several 3D cameras that are nowadays available. We let's say, tested these models of cameras that you see here for performing this skeleton tracking in a workspace. And here you can see one example of them is this Z2i. And this is one of the, let's say, reference cameras that are available, 3D cameras that are available nowadays. And these cameras are very interesting. First of all, they are not so expensive. Secondly, they can typically be battery powered. And third, they can provide you a 3D view of a scene where they are pointing with a very high accuracy, typically in the order of 1 to 3 centimeters. Okay. And then besides this, we have several object and person tracking algorithms that we can make use of to actually to try to understand, besides looking at the scene, what elements are present of interest in this scene, for example, people, and track their position and posture in space and in time. And okay, here we show an example of how we perform this. So there below on the right side of this slide, you can see what a camera sees, a segmented person, so you see only the outline of the person, plus some segments that indicates the position of the bones. And then this can be translated easily to a computational phantoms that you see reproduced in the video game-like scene. And now, besides these tracking cameras, we can also do nowadays. We can also use camera for performing 3D reconstruction. So, for example, by using this model of camera, which is quite a bulky device that rotates on itself, we can scan a workplace and generate a digital twin of that workplace. In this case, this is a scan from a temporary storage facility from our institute, SEK, where we are studying a bit the use of the system in the decommissioning application. Now, up to now, we had already quite some implementation of this system, one of which you probably already heard of, and it's Podium. In Podium, the objective of Podium was actually to develop the framework of this online computational dosimetry system. And in fact, we believe that we succeeded in proving the feasibility of this system, but we did not solve all the problems, starting from the online aspect. So we did not manage to get real-time simulations, although we are quite close. And also we did not manage to solve all the aspects, especially in the interventional radiology application, where, for example, we did not manage to track the shields, the ceiling-mounted shields that are used by physicians by means of cameras, because they are transparent objects, so we cannot see them through our cameras. But we have an ongoing development on this. We have actually new projects that are to solve these the still open questions, and also apply this system to newer applications, such as monitoring of stuff in nuclear medicine. So, for example, people operating in laminar airflow cabinets, like in the videos that you're seeing here. And besides, let's say, applying to this new application, we're also trying to engineer a system that is more easily usable in different scenarios. So we're trying to fundamentally create a prototype, a small prototype which makes use of a small camera, a microcomputer, and then it's all battery powered, and we install this directly inside the cabinet to monitor a person. And besides this, we are also, of course, developing the, let's say, related tracking algorithms. In this case, we have a finger tracking algorithm and a syringe tracking algorithm to be able to track the positioning of the syringe once it's used in by the staff, and also for the whole person. And then besides all this, we also believe that this type of interface, this type of application can also be used for improving the training and the other aspects of radiation protection. So we're actually at the moment trying to implement this system, like I was saying, in the dismantling and disposal of nuclear power plants, of Belgian nuclear power plants in particular. And to this purpose, we are now developing a system, as you can see here, that let's say can track a person within a large environment. In this case, it's more than 200 square meters. And I don't know if it's really clear, but you can see that my colleague Mahmoud there below, there is the real scene. And it's reproduced, let's say, correctly in the 3D environment where we have the phantom moving. Everything is registered so that the spatially wise we are correctly positioned. And then we want to use this to fundamentally improve the training and the awareness of radiation, and also help the decision support in the decommissioning application. And then, okay, this brings me to the last slide of our presentation, where we'll try to do a live demo of the phantoms and then of the system with the camera. So I will try now to set up the system with my phone, actually. If you want, you can try to scan this QR code with your phone. I suggest that if you are here present here in Belgrade, to do it on the left one, so the 1-year-old female QR code. If you are at home, you can do it also on the AM, so the adult male version of the Phantom. And this will redirect you to a web page where we actually have our computational phantoms in a 3D view. And I will try now to do it live from my phone. 1 minute. Can you connect the phone? Okay. Okay, now you can see a screen of the phone. So now I pre-connected to this web page because for, let's say, internet-related issues, it's difficult here to access to internet to download the model of the Phantom. But as you can see here, we can easily make use of the Phantom. We can rotate, look at the anatomy in, let's say, all the details. If you want, we can even, let's say, make use of it in a augmented reality interface, where we put the Phantom, for example, in the room here, and we can rotate it and rescale it, and then even we'll try to position it. We can look through it to see all the various organs. And okay, besides being a nice gimmick to show, and maybe could be useful for training purposes, you can imagine that we can also actually visualize the output of our simulations, so those to each voxels of this Phantom in this view, which will help, of course, in interpreting the results of a simulation. And then, okay, the second demo, it's on my PC. Okay. Okay, so what I'm doing now is to set up the camera system and try to track my position, let's say, pretending that I am in this facility. So I'm moving now in front of the camera, and as you can see, the camera is able to track my position quite easily. Okay, I cannot get too far here, so you cannot really see myself tracked very far. But the nice part is that, for example, if I rotate this camera now towards the public, you can see the scene is rotated, and the people in the public are also represented, each of them with a phantom. If you were standing up, it will be able to track several people. We tested, I think, up to 50 people. They will be tracked easily, as long as you are standing up and not, let's say, overlapping in the view one another. So this was to give you an idea of these implementations, because also they're quite nice to see. Thank you. Thank you for the attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pascal. So are there any questions? There's one up there. Do we have any? Okay.
So I think it's a really interesting work you are doing. So what I get from your presentation is like you will be directly removing the need of TLDs.
TLDs, well, dosimeters in general.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the final goal.
Yes. So suppose if person is working into closed environment and somehow he got exposed. So what happens is if radiations are falling on this wall, they have a tendency to scatter as well.
Sorry, can you repeat?
So when radiations are like getting emitted into the room,
Yes.
so they get scattered back onto the body from the walls as well.
Yeah, as long as we have a model of the room, we can simulate scattering with this. Or you refer to, let's say, a situation where there is a contaminant, a radioactive substance.
I mean that suppose I'm working here.
Yes.
So usually TLD does that how much body is getting, how much radiation body has got.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it, yeah, exactly.
Yes, but suppose when the radiations are going on to walls as well, they scatter back onto your body as well.
Yeah, we can do that. We can take into account of this also with simulations. No, not really a problem.
Okay, so means I was asking, have you also considered this, or you will consider this thing?
Yeah, we do consider it, yes.
Okay.
Although it's always, let's say, important to evaluate what is the contribution of each, if the direct irradiation or the scatter radiation is, I mean, which one is more important, and then typically we will define in this scenario what is the most important primary particle or secondary particles, and then we will adapt our simulation depending on this.
Okay, thank you.
So we have one more question in the chat.
Okay, so this is a question from Denison Sousa Santos. Knowing that bones are rigid and soft tissue are flexible, how do you deal with those conflicting properties when you distort the shape of the phantom?
Yes, we can take into account of it because when we perform this procedure of, can you go back to the slides? Yeah. When we perform this procedure of rigging and skinning, we can actually introduce a deformation curve, which is actually rigid for some organs like the bones, so that, okay, so in here I'm visualizing just the skin where you have, let's say, a gradient in the weights. In the case of the bone, you will see them all red, fundamentally. Okay, the next one. So as you can see in here, for example, in the case of the leg, in the second picture, the bones are rotated rigidly along the about the joints, which are the center of rotation for the joint for the bone, while the other tissues, the tissues in the outside part of the knee, they are stretched, while the ones inside in the inside part of the knee, they are compressed. And typically, you do this also trying to respect masses. So there are some rules, let's say, that allows you some mathematical rules that you can introduce to respect the mass around that region.
Okay, thank you very much, Pascale. It was a very nice. So now we have to switch to the other laptop again, I think, right? Oh, yeah, okay, good. And our next speaker is Maria Sankel, who will tell about the implementation of ICRP computational reference phantoms for different exposure scenarios. Please, Maria.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank EURADOS and the organizing committee of this EURADOS school for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about the implementation of the ICRP computational reference phantoms in different exposure scenarios. So this is the overview of my talk. First, I would like to introduce to you these adult reference computational phantoms of ICRP publication 110. Then say a few words about the red bone marrow dosimetry that was recommended by ICRP for these phantoms. Then talk about a bit this intercomparison exercise that EURADOS has conducted, employing these phantoms in various exposure scenarios. Describe to you the approach that we chose and who participated, name some problems that we encountered before I come to summary and conclusions. So here you see these reference computational phantoms. They were published as ICRP publication 110. These are voxel phantoms, and they represent the anatomical characteristics of the ICRP reference men, adult male and female reference men, according to ICRP publication 89. So the male is 1.76 meters high and has a weight of 73 kilograms. The female is a bit smaller, 163 centimeter high and 60 kilograms. And these are voxel phantoms. The male has approximately 2 million voxels and the female approximately 4 million voxels. They have 140 different organ identification numbers, and they can be downloaded from the ICRP publications website. Now I would like to say a few words about special features of the skeleton of these phantoms. There are two types of radiation-sensitive tissues in the skeleton. There is first the red or active bone marrow, and a second tissue, the endosteum, which is also known as bone surface or shallow marrow. This is a 50 micrometer thick layer that covers the surfaces of the bone trabecula and the cortical surfaces of the medullary cavities in the shafts of the long bones. And you see this microscopic structure of the bone trabecula and the marrow cavities between them in the picture on the bottom left. And you see that this is a very tiny structure, and of course this cannot be represented by these voxels that have dimensions of several millimeters. That's impossible. So we had to incorporate this structure on a macroscopic scale. And you see that the structure of this trabecular bone structure is like a sponge, and this gave also the name to this structure, spongiosa region or sponge's bone. And what we did, of course, we could not subsegment, that's clear. So we represented its composition, its different composition in the different bones, because this is made up of the trabecular bone, red and yellow bone marrow. And in ICRP publication 70, the relative amount of red bone marrow among the different bones is given, and also the cellularity of the bone marrow in the individual bones. The cellularity is the percentage of the bone marrow that is still hematopoietically active. The rest is then the yellow bone marrow. So we have segmented this homogeneous spongiosa region in each bone, and we gave it a different composition, reflecting the relative amounts of red, yellow bone marrow and trabecular bone. And this brings me to the second point, because we have to calculate the dose to the red bone marrow, and of course this is not directly represented. So we have to use this spongiosa region to derive the dose to the bone marrow. For electrons, this is quite straightforward. This is a directly ionizing radiation, and the energy deposition in the spongiosa region is quite homogeneous. So the mean dose to the spongiosa is reasonably reflecting the dose to the bone marrow also, to the red bone marrow and also to the shallow marrow. So we can estimate the bone marrow dose from the spongiosa dose for each bone separately. And then for the skeletal average, we make a mass averaging. So the relative amount of the bone marrow of each bone is contributing to this overall bone marrow dose. And the same is also done for the shallow marrow, for the endosteum, but there the mass weights are different because the masses are different from the red bone marrow in the different bones. The situation is more complicated for photons and neutrons because they are indirectly ionizing, and there are energy ranges for which secondary charged particle equilibrium is not existing in the marrow cavities. For photons below approximately 200 keV, there are more photoelectric events in the bone trabecula than in marrow. And that means we have more secondary electrons in the trabecula. These go to the marrow cavities and deposit additional energy there. So the dose to marrow tissues is enhanced due to these additional secondary electrons. And for neutrons below approximately 150 MeV, more recoil protons are generated in the marrow than in the bone trabecula. And these transport then energy to the trabecula, and the absorbed dose to the marrow tissues is suppressed in comparison to the mean spongiosa dose. So we cannot use the mean spongiosa dose differently from the electrons. For photons and neutrons, one has to use a different approach. And this was recommended in ICRP publication 116. So for these two radiation types, one has to use the fluence in these spongiosa regions. One has to record this. The energy-dependent photon fluence, let's say now, and this has to be multiplied by a bone-specific, also energy-dependent dose-response function, and then this is summed up over all these energies, so the integral is formed for a specific bone, and then again for the average over the whole skeleton, again this same type of mass averaging as for the electrons is performed. And these energy-dependent dose-response functions are different for red bone marrow and endosteum, and for photons and neutrons. And these have been tabulated in ICRP publication 116 and can be used from there. So now I would like to introduce to you this EURADOS intercomparison exercise. For this, the reference phantoms, the ICRP reference phantoms, should be exposed in 6 different exposure situations so that we formed as tasks. This was a cobalt-60 point source in front of the phantom, a 10 keV neutron point source at the same position, ground contamination with americium-241, exposure in a cloud of nitrogen-16, 2 typical X-ray examinations, and for internal dosimetry, monoenergetic photons, monoenergetic electrons, and 2 specific radionuclides in 4 typical frequent source organs. And we wanted to have the dose then in a series of radiation-sensitive target organs. So what did we want to test with this intercomparison exercise? Of course, the first thing we wanted to see if it is common knowledge to correctly combine these voxel phantoms with various radiation transport codes. Then we wanted to see if those quantities are being correctly understood: organ absorbed dose rate, organ equivalent dose rate, effective dose, and also for internal dosimetry, the absorbed fractions, specific absorbed fractions, and SVLs. Then we wanted to see if there is enough knowledge about this red bone marrow dosimetry method as recommended by ICRP. And we wanted also that certain normalization quantities were used, not only the dose per particle, but practical normalization quantities like air gamma-free in air, gamma area product, and activity concentration. So the approach that we chose, each of these tasks was supervised by a member of EURADOS Working Group 6. This responsible person established a master solution, and this was then controlled. The correctness was confirmed by second and sometimes third calculations by other members that supported the task. When all these master solutions had been confirmed and we were certain that they are reliable, we announced the task specifications on the EURADOS website and distributed it also to several mailing lists. And by this, we invited participants to solve one or several of the tasks according to their knowledge, interest, and of course the time that they were able to devote to this exercise. We provided templates in the form of Excel sheets for each of the tasks in which the solutions should be entered in order to facilitate evaluation for the responsible persons, because it is much easier to evaluate data that have the same format and structure from everyone. Then these were analyzed by the responsible person, the solutions that they got back from the participants, and then the responsible persons informed the participants about how well their solutions agreed with the master solution. And with this feedback, then also, if needed, revised solutions were invited. And we intended to publish all this in the open literature, and we offered co-authorship to all the participants to these papers. And this was also accepted by all. So this intercomparison exercise was well received by the computational dosimetry community. We had 32 participants or teams of participants from 17 countries. That solved at least one task, and some participants solved several or even all tasks. This was very brave because this was a very extensive thing. A variety of Monte Carlo codes were used, FLUCA, GIANT4, several codes from the MCMP family, PEN-EASY, Tripoli, and Virtual Monte Carlo. The agreement of the initial solutions with the master solutions were extremely variable. We found in several cases agreement within a few percent or sometimes identical, more or less, with the master solution. But on the other hand, we also found many solutions that deviated by factors or orders of magnitude. Many problems could be solved by the feedback between the participants and the responsible persons. And sometimes the initial errors were due to simple carelessness, misunderstanding concerning the normalization quantities. Sometimes, for example, for the air camera, free in air, a different distance was chosen. Then, of course, the normalization quantity is quite different. Then effective dose, the tricks that have to be applied to evaluate this, for example, for neutrons, were not generally known, not by all participants. And in many cases, the ICRP recommended bone dosimetry method was not applied correctly. So this was obviously is quite a difficult topic. And this is also the reason why we why we published an extra article on this in this virtual special issue in radiation measurements to explain this a bit more detailed than what is described in ICRP publication 116. And we hope that this is then easier to follow. And the revised solutions were in most cases in much better agreement, not in all cases, unfortunately. So there were a few problems with the participant solutions. In some cases where the results were quite different from the master solutions, we noticed that obviously the quality assurance had been missed out of the results. For example, some outliers could have been realized by plausibility considerations. For example, the ground contamination is a rather homogeneous exposure condition, and then one can expect that the organ doses must have similar magnitudes. And if one organ has a dose that is a magnitude different, this must be suspicious. And also when there are several energies considered, then it is very unlikely that the result for an intermediate energy is completely outside the range of all other energies. So this would also be an indication of there must be something wrong. And for many of these situations, there are, if not identical, but nevertheless rather similar exposure situations have already been published, also partly by ICRP. And then comparison with literature values would also have indicated for outliers. Another quite different problem is that some participants, when they changed their results and sent in their revised solutions, did not tell us what they changed in their computational procedure. Even when we asked back, we did not get to the ground of the issue. And then this means, of course, that the appropriateness of the corrections cannot be judged, and the reasons for the initial errors remain unclear. And of course, we would have liked to know what errors had been made, because this could be given as hints to other participants. And also one could be aware in future similar exercises that this type of error is to be expected. But if one does not have a clue what was wrong, this does not help us further. So in summary, EURADOS has conducted an intercomparison exercise with tasks of practical interest in medical physics and occupational and environmental radiation protection. The correct simulation of the proposed tasks required the knowledge of the physical quantities involved, and of course, mainly also the ability to combine the ICRP-ICRU reference computational phantoms correctly with various radiation transport codes. And we found that this was not a principal problem, so this was obviously feasible. The main scope of the intercomparison exercise was to offer an open forum for discussion and training in the field of computational dosimetry. And in some cases, no knowledge about potential miscomprehensions could be gained, since the participant did not disclose to us how they improved their computational procedure. And we found that sometimes participants were not aware that they should quality control the data before they send them. Simple plausibility checks or comparison with literature data would help in these cases. But we think, in summary, also that we can say that such studies are beneficial to the field of computational dosimetry, because in these cases where the feedback is functioning between the organizers and the participants, one can directly train the participants. And of course, with publishing these tasks and the results, there is again increased availability of representative dose values for various exposure conditions, and these may aid future novice users in the quality assurance of their methods. And with this, I would like to close and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. You were definitely the speaker who kept the time exactly, even before the question and answers. Are there any questions? Are there any supportive comments? Something I should? Well, okay. Everything excellently explained. Thank you very much.
I did not present specific results because all this, it would have been too extensive with these different tasks, and all this has been published in this virtual special issue of radiation measurements.
Yes, and in fact, if I may add, it's about, I don't know, I can't say exactly, it's about 60 pages printed plus tons of supplemental data tables and figures. So it's quite an extensive collection of data. So thank you very much, Maria. Okay, so we come to our next speaker, which is Robert Bernard, who will talk about data processing and radiation protection dosimetry. Hi, Robert.
Hello. Okay. Normal. Can you hear me in the last row? Okay. So, my name is Robert Bernard. I'm coming from Ruđer Bošković Institute. I'm head of the Radiation Protection Department and also head of the dosimetry laboratory. So today I will give you a talk about data processing in radiation protection dosimetry. So this scheme, which is sketched by Francesco, probably you can already recognize the sketch from Francesco. This scheme basically shows a typical one relation between dosimetrist and information technology. So most of us are either chemists or physicists. Some of us have background in computers, but not all of us. So it's not so easy for us to understand all these protocols and all these things in information technology. So today I will present you the work which was done within the EURADOS Working Group 2, harmonization of individual monitoring, the task group which is called Dosimetry and Information Technology. This task group was formed in 2020 because of the needs to identify some questions and problems which are facing the dosimetry services, and also to make some recommendations to solve. So far we have identified 4 tasks in this field, with some more tasks which we are thinking about. We have prepared the first draft, which is going to be published, and the tasks which are identified at the moment are relating to data storage, to data encryption, to safe and effective communication paths, and safe and effective data transfer. Also, it will cover the GDPR. I understand that most of us and most of you are already overwhelmed with this GDPR, but we think it's necessary to address it one more time. Specifically, we will address the right to be forgotten, the data minimization, and privacy of personal data and dosimetry, because we think this is the most important parts for the dosimetry service in this GDPR. At the beginning, what is data processing? There are many definitions, but the simplest one is that the data processing is manipulation of data by computer. So minimally, it consists of input, processing, and output. Usually, this processing part is more complex. It could be collection of data, storage of data, transfer of data, which includes then encryption and so on. So what are we processing in radiation protection dosimetry? Basically, 2 types of data, personal data and non-personal data. Speaking of personal data, it's usually the names of our workers, surname, IDs, date of birth, place of birth, email, genders, and there those genders, there are those records which are probably the most important things that we are processing. In some countries, those records are considered as medical data, and there are some other types of medical data that some of us are processing, like pregnancy dates. We are also processing the industry types of the workers, the work history of the workers, and there is the other data like algorithms, procedures, standards, and contracts, and some other things, but we will not focus on these things. The things that we are focusing the most is the personal data, because it's the most sensitive data that is being processed. So data storage of the collected information must ensure uptime and data availability, integrity of data, and security. So data availability can be split up into 2 related but not the same concepts, which is uptime redundancy and backup. So uptime redundancy is saying how to ensure that the data stays available on day-to-day routine. Redundancy is basically duplicated in infrastructure. In general, the redundancy is something negative. Like if you are a redundant worker, then this is not necessarily positive. But in the networking, the redundancy is something which is positive, and all the data, like we really want redundancy in the information technology. Also, it's important to say that the redundancy is not the backup. Redundancy means that you have a lot of arrays of, let's say, storage drives, and that not on the. It's possible that if you have more storage drives, that not on each drive is storing the same data, but usually each drive is storing just a segmentation of the data. We also have to ensure integrity of the data. we should protect the data against unintended change. This is done by RAID, redundant array of independent disks, most often. And we should protect the data against intended change. So this means that somebody else can interfere with our data, and this is done by limiting the access and cryptography signing as well. And there is the backup, which should be the last resort option to recover the data. And it's also very important to have the separate access controls for primary systems and for the backup in order that we don't lose the access to both the primary systems and both backups, then we will lose our data. On this scheme is shown the general network design. So segmenting the network into protected enclaves that have minimal, if any, contract with each other is necessary. So you can see that this pointer doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't matter. So each enclave has to be protected. It's usually protected by the firewall. So we have internal internet connected service. We have like DOS management service, work PC, product PC, and all of this enclave is protected by the firewall, and then it's interconnected. On this scheme is shown scaling of the storage system, because it's necessary to scale all your storages that you have. There is direct attached storage. This means usually a hard drive which is connected by wire to your computer. Then there is network attached storage. So you are connected to the storage through your network, and there is storage attached network, which is basically the same as network attached storage, but it's more complex, and it's based on the fibers, and it's more quicker. The data flows more. It has higher speeds than on network attached storage. So we all know that it's really necessary to use the encryption. So wherever possible, it's necessary to use encryption, to engage the IT support, and of course to choose easy-to-use encryption system, because if you are sending the data, encrypted data to your customers, you're not expecting that they will be IT experts. So you should use something as simple as possible. You should engage with the clients, provide information and help, and also to decide what needs encrypting. So as I mentioned before, basically you will need to encrypt personal data. All the other data maybe you don't need to encrypt, because if you encrypt just a section of the data, it will be more easier for our customers. You should give plenty of notice. You should have a fallback option, and if you are sending the whatever type of data by web links, you should put a time limit for these links, something like 1 week, 2 weeks, or 1 month until the link disappears. Now something about communication paths and data transfer. So there are basically 3 types of communication paths: paper-based, voice-based, and digital-based. Speaking of the security, the digital-based communication can be the most secured, but if you don't use the encryption and all the other things that is going to ensure security, then it can be really weak. So the voice-based communications is usually the least secure, and paper-based communication, and then digital-based communication. It's the same with the authentication. So if you use voice-based communications, like if you are speaking with your customers about those records, you don't have any authentication of the received. So the general purpose IT security measures are corporate IT system security accreditation, the trainings, internal network infrastructure and firewalls which are carefully designed for your system, authentication of all electronic data transfer to restrict the information access to unauthorized users, encryption, and electronic data transfer should only occur using secure internet gateway like VPNs, HTTPS, secure web pages, SSH tunneling, and so on. You should keep the evidences of each access, and you should define protocols for dealing the data. Data portability is an individual right which can be carried out by a data subject towards a data controller. The main purpose of data portability is to prevent the vendor locked-in phenomenon. That means that with data portability, you want to ensure that the data that you are sending to someone can be easily opened. And if you store the data in structured manners, like SQL or equivalent databases, you can export it easily, either in SQL or XML, the necessary information with minimal development effort. You always have to ask yourself if you have necessary mechanism in place to be able to see the entire user history in your system, and of course, is it really necessary to see it, and is it necessary to transfer this data? So GDPR regulation, which is in power from 2016, is the regulation on the protection of natural persons with regards to the processing of personal data and the free movement of such data. So there is the part which is saying that each person has the right that his data can be erased at any point of time. But as I already said, in many of European countries, this is the dose record data is considered as medical data, and there are also some other legislations which are in power. So mainly, these legislations which are in power are saying that those records shall be kept until the age of 75 of each worker, but in any case not less than 30 years after termination of the work which is involving some kind of exposure. So that in principle means that worker can ask to be erased only after he's 75 years of age or after 30 years that he was exposed to some ionizing radiation. Then there is data minimization. So data which are we processing, collecting, storing, sharing, and etc., shall be sufficient to properly fulfill the IMS stated purpose, should be rationally linked to that purpose, and limited to whatever is necessary. So when speaking on data minimization, we shall narrow data collection, so not collect all the data, just to collect the data which is absolutely necessary. We should avoid collection of sensitive data. So the more sensitive data, such as health data, then we are in, let's say, bigger problem. We should minimize the access control, and we should periodically review all the data that we are storing. It's not good to have too much data, inadequate data, and also it's not good to have many copies and backups. Usually it's good to have only 1 or 2 backups for your system. So when is allowed to process data? The data subject has given specific explicit consent to the processing of data. This is one of the cases. Processing is necessary to execute or prepare a contract to which the data subject is a party. And the data process complies with a legal obligation or is needed to save somebody's life. There is also the case when processing is necessary to perform a task in the public interest or carry out some official function, and there is also some legitimate interest in processing personal data. Data processing principles are listed here. It's accountability, accuracy, so we shall really think that all the personal data should be that we are collecting shall be accurate and up to date. Data minimization, which is already mentioned, lawfulness, fairness and transparency, purpose limitation, storage limitation, and integrity and confidentiality of the data. So with this I would like to close. Oh, yeah. There is also a risk assessment. So some of our laboratories are already accredited to the new standard ISO 17025 from 2017. And this standard recognizes something which is called a risk assessment. So basically it's necessary to identify risk and measures to reduce those risks that you have. This is also applicable to data management, and it's possible to use qualitative and quantitative methods for risk assessment. So we have prepared one spreadsheet to help the IMSs to deal with these risks. So some of the examples of the risks that are identified are use of cloud storage, because it's not usually always positive. Like there are some drawbacks of the using of cloud storage for our data records. Then there is sending data without encryption and, let's say, backup, which is not used. These are some of the examples, but all the individual monitoring services will be able to find their own risks, and they will find the measures which are going to reduce these risks. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert.
I understand that this is not the computational methods, but it's something which is most connected with like we are in working group 2. We are dealing with harmonization and not exactly with computational methods, but this topic is something which is the most connected with this computational methods.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we included it because it has to do with digitization, which is, of course, the general topic. And it's an important topic, obviously.
Yeah.
So, are there any questions? There's one in the chat, okay.
Is that okay? Yeah. The question is from Denison Sousa Santos. Do you think that the protection of personal data and the right to be forgotten might pose difficulties for the unscarce collection of national data on doses of workers and public?
Well, it's defined within national legislation. So if the IMSs needs to send the data to the regulator, then the only option is to send it, but in some kind of encrypted way, if I understood the question correctly.
Actually, it's more about the right to be forgotten, but
The right to
it's already anonymized, I think, when they are doing a
yeah, so
it's from Ezrex platform or things like this, then that's more, that's not individual personal data, that's those collection, but I think it's anonymized. So there's no big issue for this.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, then thank you very much
You're
again,
welcome.
Robert. And we come to our last speaker, Habib Saidi from the University Hospital in Geneva, who will talk to us about the emerging role of artificial intelligence in internal radiation dosimetry.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I will not escape to the rule and start, of course, by thanking the organizing committee for the invitation, for giving me the opportunity to address you today. But I feel that I've been given a very broad topic on Monday, talking to you about the emerging role of AI in internal radiation dosimetry, and I think this is sufficiently broad topic. I can probably talk about this the remaining time till the evening. So this is going to be one of these talks where we sort of have sections. We go a little into detail, and other sections we sort of skip over, or just hope to leave some time for questions if anything is missing from anybody's expectations. So, yeah, nothing to disclose, but just wanted to acknowledge actually the financial support from the European Commission. So this Symphonia project has been mentioned a number of times. And of course, thank the partners. Some of the developments I'm going to show you today were developed in the framework of this project, which focuses on the use of AI-based solutions for the development of advanced computational models. You see some of them here, and then the use of AI again, so for radiation dose estimation, both in X-ray computed tomography and also nuclear medicine imaging procedures. This is not really an outline, but kind of list of topics I'm going to cover. So I was expecting to have a very heterogeneous audience here, so the people who probably have never heard about medical imaging. So there's kind of brief introduction just to show you some of the advances in the field. And then just with a couple of slides, I'll just try to convince you about the role, the need for AI in radiation dosimetry estimates. And then I will cover the whole chain of applications where AI is playing a role. So not only in terms of dosimetry, but really the whole chain from image acquisition, image reconstruction, corrections for quantitative imaging until we get to the radiation dosimetry calculations, obviously. So the last item, which is prognostic modeling, is slightly outside the scope of this presentation, so will not be covered. And then I'll summarize and present some future perspectives. So during the last decade, we have witnessed some major advances in nuclear medicine instrumentation, so with a major shift paradigm from conventional, so gamma cameras using the Anger logic that have been developed in the late 50s, and then obviously digitized afterwards, to solid state cameras that use semiconductors, obviously, so CZT mostly. The majority of the manufacturers use CZT for this development. So we're very excited to get this star guide by GE, so installed in our facility this summer. But just to show you quickly, so the advantages of these technologies, so improving image quality. So this is one of the systems called Veriton CT, which is similar in terms of conceptual design with the star guide that I just mentioned. And so the advantage is that obviously so you've got the X-ray CT in the back, and the nuclear medicine device in the front, and the advantage, which enables actually to improve the sensitivity, spatial resolution, and is the potential actually to get the detectors very close to the patient's body. Body contouring actually is extremely well modeled with this device, which enables actually improved sensitivity and also spatial resolution, because with the improved energy resolution, as you know, of semiconductors, which enables actually energy discrimination for Compton scatter, and also allows dual tracer imaging on these devices. Just to tell you a little bit about the history actually of hybrid imaging, so PET-CT was not the first device. So Bruce Hasegawa was the first to introduce SPECT-CT in the 89 exactly. So Bruce Hasegawa was a scientist from University of California in San Francisco. But PET-CT came a bit later, but this is overall the principle of the operation of this device. So we've got an X-ray CT. I don't have laser here, but anyway, so in the front we've got an X-ray CT, and we'll start with the acquisition of what we call a scout scan, so kind of extended projection view, and then we define the axial field of view, and then we start rotating the X-ray tube and the detectors which are located behind the patients. And then we, once the spinal CT is acquired, so we'll push the patient towards the PET detectors, which are shifted by 70 or 60, 70 centimeters, depending on the manufacturer. And then we start the acquisition of the PET scan, and then we fuse the two images together to get the fused PET CT, which is used actually for clinical interpretation. And whatever the application is, monitoring treatment response or radiation therapy treatment planning. PET-MR is the other side of the story. So combining with PET-MR is more complicated than combining PET with CT, obviously, because there's some interference between the two subsystems. So the difficult actually to put conventional readout technologies, including photomultiplier tubes within a strong magnetic field. And also we cannot disturb the magnetic field homogeneity actually with these devices. So the idea here is to have, you see here different design trends that have been adopted by the scanner manufacturers, including Philips. So we were lucky to get one of the first systems, first in Europe, second worldwide. About 12 years ago. So it's a la PET CT, which means that you've got the MR system and the PET system with minor modifications, shielded PMTs, and a distance of 3 meters between the two devices actually to avoid interference. And then solid state technology, which is MR compatible, was introduced later on by a couple of manufacturers, including Siemens with the MMR, so they used avalanche photodetectors, which are not compatible, obviously. And then GE came with their Signan, then silicon photomultipliers were introduced, and then more recently, so United Imaging, company based in Shanghai that was involved with another project I'm going to mention just in a few seconds, came up with a device that was also FDA approved just a couple of years ago. Just to show you some of the images that could be generated with such a system, so high resolution, you see the MR, the PET, and the fusion between the two for brain. Obviously, the advantage of MR is that you have very high soft tissue contrast, which is an indication for a number of clinical applications. Also for radiation therapy treatments planning, for brain, for prostate, and so on, and then for cardiovascular issues, so some nice images here. A recent trend, actually, so not really something new in the field, because the concept has been suggested by Thierry Jones in the 80s, but Simon Cherry, so the PIs that you see here from the University of California in Davis, Badawi and Thierry Jones managed to get close to $16 million from the NIH to design this first total body PET scanner, which the close to 2 meters axial field of view, and I think the number of sessions actually dedicated to this device at the annual meeting of the Society of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging is increasing steadily, probably too, during this year's meeting. Anyway, so this increases obviously the sensitivity of the system and enables to decrease significantly the activity injected to patients or the acquisition time. A couple of other groups, so one research group, so the group of Joel Karp in Philadelphia, at UPenn, and another commercial device produced by Siemens with an axial field of view close to 106 centimeters with an excellent temporal resolution. I think there are a couple of devices installed in Europe, University of Bern in Switzerland and University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And so this is research in this area is probably going to continue, but there are very few centers which can afford the cost of this of these systems. That's in a pilot clinical study, so this UC Davis group managed actually to show that they can reduce the acquisition time to less than 40 seconds and get diagnostic quality images still. And the other advantage for compartmental modeling, for quantification actually of features that are of interest from biological standpoints, is that we can basically acquire the input function, so start scanning the patients and get the time activity curves for all organs simultaneously, which obviously is also interesting for radiation dosimetry applications, as mentioned earlier. Right, so there are also some new emerging concepts for novel PET detector configurations, and this is one of my idea from one of my PhD students. So he came up with a concept that he demonstrated through Monte Carlo simulations. Obviously, we don't have the funding to build the device, but the idea is to combine actually high spatial resolution detectors, small and thin, with high sensitivity detectors, which are slightly larger but thicker. and to have kind of a multifunctional PET device where we can basically, with mechanical, complex mechanical linear motors that enable you actually to move the detectors and to change actually the configuration of the system so that you can have a large bore system dedicated for whole body imaging, get it smaller actually for brain imaging, for prostate imaging, and then have also some gaps on the right and the left sides, which is very interesting actually for monitoring of treatment, for monitoring proton therapy dose verifications. Right, so getting to the point of today, so there is a long history actually of AI that I'm not going to go into details for the interest of the time, but so obviously Turing was the first actually who started to debate about the concept of intelligence, and then he came with the Turing test, which was adopted later on, and then the term artificial intelligence was really coined at Dartmouth conference in 1956, and then there are some major milestones. For instance, IBM's Deep Blue, which was able actually to beat chess champion Kasparov, I think, at that time, and then a number of other milestones, including DeepFace, AlphaGo, so basically Google. I think you're familiar with this. And then more recently, so 2021, so major publication where there was a competition in biology, and the people who won the competition so used advanced AI-based solutions. And obviously, so in parallel or correlated with these developments in AI, so there were some major milestones in the history of medical physics, including the use of the first LINAC, so in the 50s in Stanford, the first positron imaging device, so Massachusetts General Hospital, Anger and his developments, PET-MR, and then finally the Explorer, and PET-LINAC, which came much recently. Well, so I think, and I think a number of other medical physicists share this opinion, is that AI is not going to be limited to academy, to academic research and to industry. So it will have a profound impact on the profession of medical physicists. And so within one of the IFOM's tasks groups led by Federica Zanca, so we recommended a curriculum actually to expand the training of medical physics to include AI components, and at least not limited only to Europe, but I think there is a debate also worldwide. For instance, this point-counterpoint articles in medical physics discussing these aspects. All right, so regarding the role of artificial intelligence, so I chosen actually this nice illustration or flowchart from a very good paper by Hosni and colleagues published in Nature Reviews in Cancer. So where they basically highlighted the role of AI in the clinical radiology workflow, so going from image acquisition to pre-processing till the generation of images and then image-based tasks, which obviously include segmentation and the extraction of quantifiable features, till the generation of textual reports and the integration within larger omics databases. And in the second part, actually, they also highlighted the role of AI in the detection of abnormalities, basically malignant lesions, so the characterization of those malignancies and their use into either monitoring of treatment response or radiation therapy treatment planning and so on. A recent review also published by Benjamin and colleagues, they reviewed or they surveyed, if you like, the FDA-approved products which mention AI either in the description or the name directly, and they, if I recall the paper, I think they identified 65 products, and in the 65 products, around 29 were mentioned actually AI directly, so in the name, either in the name of the product or the description or the announcements of the AI. So I think this is very important study actually surveying these developments. And then just going to show you, so this only one slide for CT, and then we move to nuclear medicine, because most of the devices used in nuclear medicine are hybrid devices, either SPECT-CT or PET-CT. So CT is an essential component also of imaging nuclear medicine. And in this study, so one of my PhD students, in the context of COVID chest CT scans, So he developed actually a framework which enables to use actually AI to generate or to predict full dose scans from low dose scans using residual network architecture. So obviously we did not scan the patients twice, which is not ethical. So we just developed a kind of simulation platform which enables to generate low dose scans from full dose scans, which was quite realistic and validated. And then you see here so that the predicted full dose scans enables to generate images that really look like the full dose scans that you see on the left side. The noise component that you see in the low dose is reduced significantly, and then there obviously, so with the pretty large database, and what I don't show you here is that obviously AI gives you very good results in 99% of the cases, 99.5, but you've got some outliers. And in this context, so we've got a number of them actually there to are depicted by the radiologists. And one of those components, so this obviously COVID-19 patients, so one of the COVID-19 lesions, which was, I think, patchy consolidation converted to consolidation, which means that it's not outlier because it changes the reporting. The other application, which is also being considered carefully by a number of investigators, and including the group of Damilakis from Greece and also Mark Ashley from DKFZ in Germany, is the use of deep learning actually for estimating the dose distributions in X-ray CT. And this is also some other works by one of my PhD students. I'm not quite happy with the results because contrary to what has been reported actually by the group in Germany, we've got the uncertainties or the errors actually in the estimates are close to 9% on average with a very high standard deviation in the lungs. And yeah, obviously there is a scope for improvements. Right, so for brain imaging, so the data can be acquired in what we call list mode format, which enables the user actually to decimate the list mode data to generate sonograms corresponding actually to only a fraction of the acquired events. And this is what was done in this work here. So a unit network was used actually with the to train the brain data sets actually, so the full dose and the low dose corresponding to 5% only of the events were trained in projection domain and also in the sinogram domain. And this is the standard image quality, which is according to the clinical protocol used in routine. We inject in our institution close to 200 megabecquerel for brain scans and require static scan for 20 minutes. And then this is the low dose corresponding to only 5% of the events, as I mentioned, so we decimated the sinogram, corresponding to less injected activity, so fraction 20, 10 megabecquerel, or to reduce in the acquisition time with the same injected activity. The images are not of diagnostic quality, as you might guess here. And these are the predictions in the image domain and in the projection domain. These are the BIS maps. Then what's important here is that when you ask the nuclear medicine physicians actually to evaluate the image quality for you, they were asked actually to give scores ranging from 1 to 5, 1 interpretable, and then 5 is excellent. And then this is the outcome, so 4.1 for the predictions compared to 4.47 for the full dose scan, which is used in clinical routine. So really don't want to claim too much. We're not excellent, but I think still acceptable. And then what we did here is that some quantitative voxel-wise analysis. So we took all the images of the patients involved in this study, and then we aligned them to the Hammersmith Brain Atlas, which consists of 83 brain regions. And then you see the Bland-Alderman plots here, so less bias, obviously, with the training in the image in the sinogram space, so confirming basically the image quality assessment by the physicians. What I did not mention here is that we have a fully time-of-flight machine, meaning that you can exploit actually the time difference between the two annihilation photons traveling in opposite directions because of the huge size of the data sets, and then in follow-up studies. So we take this into account during the training of the data sets when we end up with this results. So when pull the data and use statistical parametric mapping, so the red dots here show regions with statistically significant differences, and you see that the training when performed in the projection space, you've got less red dots, meaning that this is really, this training did really a good job. So we expanded this to, from brain to whole body imaging, and we used a couple of neural network architectures, including residual networks, because we had some experience with these networks for previous work, and then CycleGAN, which is extremely popular in the image analysis literature. And then again, so instead of decimating the sinogram, because that was difficult on the Siemens machine, so we scanned the patients twice, and then the factor between the full dose, full time acquisition, I would say, was a factor of 7 or 8. So I'll show you the figures here. So yeah, the full dose was close to 3 minutes per bed position, and then the second low dose scan or fast scan is 25 minutes, which means that the factor of 7 between the two. So this is just a representative study comparing the residual network that you see and the predicted images with the CycleGAN. So visually speaking, I think with the naked eye of physicists, probably you can see some differences, but again, we rely on the assessments by specialists in our field, and then the results, as you can see here, were quite similar to the brain study with small differences in the sense that we split it, actually, the total body scan into regions, the brain and neck, and then the thorax and the abdomen. Just to, for the sake of time, I think what was important in this study is that we realized that qualitative assessment by itself is not sufficient. And we asked our nuclear medicine colleagues to really look to the images very closely and to count the lesions, the number of malignant lesions they see in the different images. And then we separated the lesions according to the metabolic activity of the lesions, what we call the standardized uptake value in the PET field. And then what you see here is basically, so the full dose scan, so they identified for the number of patients involved within this study, 115 malignant lesions. Low dose scan, not really of diagnostic quality. We missed 33 lesions. Residual network also did a good job in terms of image quality, but we missed a significant number of lesions. And then CycleGAN did really good job, but obviously we're not happy to miss 4 lesions. So that we should have the intellectual honesty to report this. So we're not happy to miss lesions, and then so this is why AI probably this will be highlighted in the conclusions. So using these techniques in clinical settings, so there is a word of caution here. So just one example to show you, not really from the field. So one clinical example. So you see that this is breast cancer. You see the don't have a laser here, but anyway, you see the primary lesion can be seen on all the images, but the second lymph node that you see with the red arrow on the right side was depicted only in the full dose, and the CycleGAN was missed by the low dose and the residual network. So we did also similar work for cardiovascular imaging. By the way, so not only the only group working in the area, but just to make things easy and just for the sake of time, so I'm just trying to give you some examples actually from the work that I know better than what has been published in the literature. So this is for cardiovascular SPECT MPI imaging. You see that the standard dose, standard acquisition time, and then we try to push really the limit to 1/8 of the activity injected to the patients. And then the conclusion of this work is that the predictions actually for half, fourth, and eighth, so up to 1/4, so the image quality as assessed by the nuclear medicine physicians was fine, but there is no way to go beyond this, at least for this commercial system and for this acquisition protocol, which is still a good outcome. Actually, if you reduce the radiation dose or the acquisition time by a factor of 4, is very good. Well, the interesting work actually done by Yuni Devaraja from Michigan. Please give me strong signal when I have 5 minutes. Just let me know. Yeah, thank you. So this is nice work also by the group in Michigan, where they used the deep neural network actually to correct for Compton scattering for Itron 90 imaging, so spectra, Bremsstrahlung SPECT imaging, which is very challenging actual radionuclide, especially if you are interested to do quantitative imaging. So they trained actually network with Monte Carlo generated data sets for virtual patients, as you can see from this slide here. And then once they obviously have three different steps. First is the training, and then second is the testing, and then the assessment, and then instead actually of training the network actually directly with the scatter projections estimated directly from Monte Carlo. So they were looking actually between the residuals between the scatter estimates by the deep neural network and the Monte Carlo based scatter estimations. And then they incorporated so the scatter estimation directly into statistical iterative reconstruction framework. And this is just one of the results they have produced here. So clinical study comparing basically so the in scatter non-scatter corrected images. So we see that the contrast is not very good, and then scatter compensated images with the scatter basically estimated with full Monte Carlo, which is extremely prohibitive in terms of computational time, and then the deep learning based solution, which appears here to do a very good job. A new trend actually is to try to get rid of CT images which are used anyhow, so on hybrid imaging devices for CT-based attenuation correction, because the CT images are coded directly in house field units, which is directly proportional to electron density, so it gives you direct information about the attenuation properties of the biological tissues. And so trying to get rid of this just to decrease the acquisition time or to be able to use standalone SPECT or PET imaging systems. And the idea is to use, which is also an approach which is applicable on PET MRI devices, where there's no direct relationship between the MR signals, so basically proton densities and T1, T2 relaxation times and the electron density. So the idea here is to get rid of the CT and to use a neural network architecture which enables you to go directly to map incorrected images to the corrected images. And this is what was done actually by Isaac, so one of my students, in the framework of this study for whole body oncologic PET imaging. So he used actually a residual network to train the model actually to learn how to map incorrected images directly to corrected images. And then in terms of implementation, so he did the training in 3 different ways. In the first approach, so he used the 2D slice-wise approach to train so the model. Second, so he's limited by the RAM of the GPU he was using, so he's only 32 slices. And then third approach, he was using patches 64 by 64, which means 3D implementation. So obviously, so there was a very good agreement. You see here the CT, PETs with the CT-based attenuation correction. So this is what we use in clinical setting, in corrected images that were used in the training, and the 3 different implementations of the AI-based solution, so 2D, 3D, so slice, 32 slices, and 3D patches, and the bias maps on the right side. What was important here is that in clinical setting, we know that by experience that in 30% of the cases, we've got mismatch in the upper abdomen or in the lower thorax because of the different breathing patterns. So the CT acquisition lasts only a few seconds. The PETs, just give me a signal. 5 minutes? Yeah. All right, so yeah, I'm going to end in 3 minutes, yeah. And then you see, so this mismatch that you see here can be sorted out by deep learning-based solutions and obviously by the commercial software, so there is no way to get rid of this. So these computation models has been described in detail so by the previous speakers, and just to give you the example of the non-human primate that was developed by one of my former PhD, former postdoc fellows, Tianwu. She was Chinese, obviously, and he received extensive training. He's from Wuhan originally in the animal anatomy, and he was helped actually by an atlas to do this manually, and took him 6 weeks. So the idea here is to use deep learning solutions to expedite the process, to accelerate the process, and that's what we did here for pregnant patients. And the idea is to develop automatically advanced computation models that can be used for radiation dosimetry calculations. And you see the 3D illustrations here, so very good agreements, probably less in the left side here for the features, but overall, so very good agreements between the manual delineation performed by the radiologists and the model developed by AI. So in terms of PET segmentation, again, very quickly, just in terms of the time, so we're interested actually by this, the outcome of this study here, so which highlighted that was a challenge, and they identified AI as the algorithm that outperformed all the other algorithms, and we developed a technique that I'm going to skip this just for the sake of time to get to the internal dose calculation. I think that was highlighted perfectly well in the talk by Manuel Bardias. So the idea for us is really to be able, as nuclear medicine physicists, to be able to generate those distributions in an analogous way that our external beam radiation therapy colleagues are doing in clinical setting. And the idea is to be able also to use deep learning to directly map the energy depositions and to train the networks to be able to do this and then counteract the necessity for Monte Carlo-based calculations. All right, so let me just skip a few slides for the sake of time, just to make my chair happy here. So this is one of the works actually done by also Azada, one of my PhD students. Where she trained also networks to be able to map the energy depositions. She did this for F-18, and then later extended this work for lutetium, which is more interesting, radionuclide for theranostics. Kind of not very happy with the outcomes. If you look to the average doses here, they were very close actually for a number of patients we include. So we're really looking for cases where we can showcase major differences between Monte Carlo and deep learning versus the conventional approaches used in clinical settings. So federated learning also is an interesting approach, which is being used not only by computer scientists, but also by the medical physics community, especially that we are using medical imaging data sets which are very sensitive, so there are privacy issues, there are ethical issues, and the idea here is instead of sharing the data sets, because nobody is going to share his clinical studies, is to share the models, train them in different centers, and then get the weight of the training and run the process on a central server. All right, so implemented this type of approaches in a couple of applications, and then just a couple of thoughts here before concluding. I think we face really a producibility crisis, probably not only in AI, but I think it's very important for AI applications because what is important is really the detail, how you train the network, how did the evaluation, all of this is poorly documented in the scientific papers, and this obviously justifies some recommendations by different professional societies, including RSNA, Medical Physics, and Society of Nuclear Medicine Task Group more recently. Okay, so skip this summary here, and this is my take-home message. So Professor Ingrid Dobashis, who used to work in Princeton for a number of years and then moved recently to Duke University. She's originally from Belgium, physicist and mathematician. She says that machine learning works very well, but we don't know why it works so well. And we consider that's a challenge for mathematicians to understand it better. And she believes that if something works, there is a reason, we have to find the reason. With this, I thank members of my lab for the excellent work. The funding body is actually supporting our research. And I thank you very much for your attention and hope that you like this citation by Abdus Salam. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for this insight into the use of artificial intelligence in a lot of applications and recent progress in nuclear medicine. Are there questions in the audience? There's one in the chat. Oh, okay, sorry.
So when you compare segmented images, manually segmented images to the ones you generate with your algorithm, do you have a metric to evaluate the difference, similarity metric, or it's just visual comparison or mass?
What we use actually, so the conventional metrics you use in the reports in the medical image segmentation literature, for instance, we've got the DICE coefficient, which gives you the idea of the overlap between the segmentations and the ground truth, which is obviously the manual delineation by an expert in the field, and there are other metrics like the Hausdorff distance and other related metrics.
Okay, we also have one in the chat, a question.
Thomas, from Leo Thomas, regarding the PET cities. As I understand, you have to train on computational phantoms since you don't scan patients twice. Could you elaborate on how you generated training data so that the single training samples don't resemble each other in a way that the models ends up learning the same extrapolation but actually captures relevant abnormalities?
Just missed the first part of the question. So which application? So that was
PET
the chest
cities.
CT?
Yes, PET and CT.
PET and CT?
Yeah.
Well, we scanned the patients twice. I think there was a misunderstanding here. So we, I mean, for the brain, we had a scan corresponding to 20 minutes, and then we simply decimate this 20-minute scan to get 5% of the events randomly, which means that we generate low-dose scan from the full-dose scan by random sampling of the events. And that's for the brain study. And then for the whole body PET CT study, so we scanned the patients twice in this case, with the difference factor of 7 between the acquisition times between the two sessions.
And the idea behind that, this training, the algorithms to predict the full dose case, how you called it, would be that then one could actually first inject a low activity level and do the scan and then actually do treatment planning?
Well, the idea is basically to reduce either the acquisition time or the activity injected to the patients because the two are correlated.
Okay.
So reducing the acquisition time, so increases patients' comforts, motion artifacts, and so on, reducing the radiation dose, so obviously the advantages.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so this brings us to the end of this 15th EURADOS school. I would like or invite you to give a big applause to all of our speakers. It was a very exciting school, I think. And I hope you all enjoyed it. And I, of course, would not like to stop without thanking our colleagues on the side for the technical support. And of course, also Babs, Kerstin, and Marianne for making it possible for those who couldn't come to still follow the presentations here. Thank you very much. And this is the end of the 15th EURADOS school. Have a safe trip home for those who are leaving, and for those who are still staying, enjoy Belgrade. And see you next time.